After Germany was defeated in the Second World War, the victorious Allies wanted to make sure that it would never threaten Europe again. Yet, a mere 10 years after the war was over, Germany had an army again. This raises the question, why? Why was Germany allowed to rebuild its military despite the destruction it caused in the previous World War? So after Germany was occupied and divided, the first thing that the Allies did was to dismantle the German military, and they had no intention of letting them get it back. The problem was that circumstances change, and when the USSR became the world's second nuclear power and a Soviet-aligned half of a country invaded the US-aligned half of a country, it focused minds. The US was fighting in Korea and so was concerned of a war breaking out in Europe, especially one which directly involved the USSR. Its leaders wanted to reassure Europeans of their support, whilst also making sure that Europeans actually did some of the heavy lifting. Given that Germany was a nation that would inevitably be on the front line, it made sense to the Americans for them to rearm. And West German leaders agreed, since for them it would be impossible to be seen as a leader in Europe without a military. It would also act as a means of West Germany asserting its independence from the United States. The British and the French didn't feel the same way as the Americans though. The British were worried that a rearmed Germany would upset the USSR and make war much more likely, whereas the French wanted to be seen as the leaders of post-war Europe, and a remilitarized West Germany was a threat to that. It won't surprise you to know that the USSR was also heavily opposed to West German rearmament. Moscow made numerous formal complaints and argued that if the West Germans were to be given a military, it wouldn't be long until they were on their way to Moscow or Paris again. These complaints weren't taken that seriously though, since the Soviets had already begun rearming East Germany and those guys were apparently fine. So why did minds change? Well, the United States only really needed to convince Britain and France. The British gave in on German remilitarization quickly, because the Americans pointed out that it meant that Britain had to do less on the continent, which was much cheaper, something which the broke British government was very happy about. The French were much more reluctant. They were convinced by the US to go along with it because Germany would be heavily integrated into NATO and would thus struggle to act alone, and France would still maintain a presence of troops in Germany. The main argument that got France to change its mind though was an economic one. If France blocked rearmament, then Germany's economy would soon eclipse France and her position as a leader in Europe would be in jeopardy. In the end, not wanting to be too isolated, France consented to German rearmament and its joining NATO. And West Germany thus began the process of rebuilding its military, which would soon become one of Europe's strongest. I hope you enjoyed this episode, with a special thanks to my patrons: James Bizanet, Kelly Moneymaker, Sky Chappelle, Kartoitska, Anthony Beckett, Rod D. Martin, Yuduan Wang, Marcus Arsner, YN Hockey, Alex Schwinn, AF Firefly, Captain Psydog, Spencer Lightfoot, Gustav Swan, The McWhopper, Shuenin, Marvin Cassow, Winston Kaywood, Spinning 3 Plates, Andy McGeehee, Kamoon Yoon, Calling Dr. Howard, Dr. Fine, Dr. Howard, Todd Short, Copper Tone, Maggie Patskowski, Words About Books Podcast, Jim Stromberg, Miss Izet, and Charles the First.